Welcome to Unrestrained, the podcast series from CPI. Here you can enjoy conversations where professionals on all sides of crisis and behavior management relax and open up about themselves, their workplace, and their clients. You'll get the latest tips and trends from the best in the business, so tune in often to integrate their experiences with your own. Hello and welcome to Unrestrained, the CPI podcast series. This is your host, Terry Vittone, and today I'm joined by Albert Krall, who in 1999 founded Little House Residential Care Services Incorporated. That's a residential treatment center for kids who are developmentally challenged, emotionally disturbed, or living with autism. Little House is located in Ontario, Canada. Hello and welcome, Albert.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Albert was born in the Netherlands, and after his formal education, he joined his father in his insurance brokerage firm. Meanwhile, Albert worked as a volunteer in various youth programs and began taking courses in philosophy and psychology and attending numerous seminars and workshops related to human behavior. In 1980, he immigrated to Canada as an entrepreneur and eventually becoming a Canadian citizen in 2015. As an entrepreneur, he was involved in an import-export food business as well as hotel management. In 1990, he got involved in the business of residential care for children, and along with his wife Bernice, founded Little House Residential Care Services in 1999. They started with one residence with a maximum of 6 children and operated that with the assistance of a child care worker. But as the demand for services grew, their business grew to include 4 residences, 1 foster home, and a total of 28 employees. To quote Albert, "It is an honor to be entrusted with the care of children who need so much and have suffered much at no fault of their own. They have paid a heavy price and continue to pay that price when society holds them responsible for behavior that is a manifestation of their pain, for which there is, essentially later in their life, little understanding from society." Back in the early 80s, Albert began to seriously question whether behavior was, in his words, simply a matter of choice. After 30 years of developing his thoughts around behavioral concepts, Albert began collecting his thoughts in a book scheduled to be published in early 2017. The working title is "Why is Behavior Not Simply a Matter of Choice?" All right, Albert, then let's begin. Could you talk about why you and Bernice decided to found Little House Residential Care Services and the models that you use to structure your business?
Yes, we both were very interested in children when we lived in our native countries. Bernice is from the United States, and she fostered in the state of New York for several years. I was involved in as a volunteer in many different youth groups. I founded some and worked in some that were existing. So when we were in Canada, we visited friends of us, and they were involved in residential care. So they were, as we call them, group home parents. And that introduced us to that kind of work, and we were very interested in that. So when an opening came, we took it with open arms. And we served in another organization for about 9 years before we decided to start our own organization. And we called it Little House. That came from Bernice, but it relates to Little House on the Prairie, which we often watched and still do at times because we love the philosophy behind it and also the importance and the values and integrity of the program.
And what philosophy specifically behind Little House on the Prairie? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. There is, to us, it comes across as a family that experiences a lot of difficulties sometimes in various areas. And how the parents relate to that is just fantastic. They have the children involved in it, and then they try to solve the problems, but not in an aggressive way, with a lot of understanding and a solution that benefits both parties involved in any conflict.
So it was the family dynamic that was so attractive to you about the show.
That's very true, because there are, in the residential care, there are 2 models, and one is the parent model, and the other one is the staff model. Both can be good, depending on the nature of the children and the difficulties that they represent. But we feel that the family dynamics are extremely important. If we can resemble a family as children deserve to grow up in, that would be great, and that has been our intention from the very beginning. So in Little House, we have parents, a mom and a dad, as we call them, and they create a family environment. They do things together as a family. They travel together. They do grocery shoppings together. They sit around a table and discuss certain things. And the basis of it is the quality of the relationships.
Seems like a very holistic model.
True, yes.
And what behavioral issues, Albert, bring children to Little House?
When the children are taken into protective custody by the Children's Aid Societies in Canada, then they often look for a placement for the children, and that can be foster care, that can be kinship care, and it can be residential care, which they usually call group homes, but I don't like the word group homes because it has a negative stigma. So when the children come, they are diagnosed with various issues. Then we look at them. When we get a referral, we look at them and look at the age. We look at what kind of issues they deal with. We look at the severity of it. We look at the dynamics in the home where we try to place them. We look at the skills and strength of our staff, the length of stay. And if that is a good match, then we take them. Now, the interesting thing is that when we get a referral and we agree to take that child, there is what they call a pre-placement. So the social worker and the child come and visit one of our homes. We are present, we talk with them, we inform the child about what they may expect. When we invite them, for us, it is a given, we're going to accept them. Whether they accept it, that's up in the air. But after meeting with a child, it is for us impossible to say, no, we don't want you, for that is, as we see it, as a rejection to the child, and they will perceive it like that. So that's how we do it with the children. It got to be a match between the home and the child and the services we provide. And that is important because there was a time when there were many children and many more children than there were beds. So what happened is the CAS would take any bed available, which is understandable, but that would result often in not a good match at no specific fault of either party. But that could end up that the placement would break down, so the child would move. And I have heard stories from the ministry where a child at the age of 14 had been in 40 different homes.
Oh, my God.
Yes.
So hence, no matter how challenging the behavior a child might present, you welcome them with open arms at Little House as a matter of policy. If
we see that we can meet the needs of the child and we say yes, we take the child, then to a point, no matter how difficult it gets, we will continue and stick it out with the child as long, with the help of professionals, as long as we can make a difference in the child's life, as long as there is progress. So in the years that we have been doing this service on the Little House, we may have ended an agreement from our side maybe 3 or 4 times, which was done in cooperation with a social worker. And it really is kind of painful for you. See the child go, and you know that more placements will break down. It's just a sad thing to see.
I can appreciate how it would be to have that recur in a child's life. Has got to be very influential on their development. On your website, you write that Little House provides, we'll go back to this concept, enhanced family-based care. And I wondered, Albert, if you talk about the philosophy and the structure and some activities that make up the care model, this family-based care model.
Yes. The enhanced family-based care rests on the foundation that we believe a family environment is in most cases very beneficial to the children, if a few conditions are being met. Besides being parents, there got to be a skill level of the parents to deal with the challenges that children represent. Then you have activities that resemble a family, but also there is the assistance of a child care worker. So when we have a home with 3 children, if it is full, we have 3 professionals in there.
Oh.
But the parents are part of it, supported by the child care worker. You could look at that when you relate it to a family as you have an older son or daughter who helps out with the younger children. Yes. That's a way of looking at it. So you keep the family environment there as much as possible.
So you're kind of scripting these kids for maybe the first time with the concept and the experience of living in an immediate family.
Yes, and that is twofold. We believe it's very important, but also when you come out of a dysfunctional family, and I often talk with staff about that. When children come out of a dysfunctional family, one of the characteristics is that there is nothing really predictable. There is no consistency. There is no predictability. So what do children do? They develop senses more than when everything is predictable and logic. So they can come into a home when mom has been drinking, dad is angry. Within seconds, they sense, this is not good. So with that skill, they come into our homes. And they can tell within a very short period of time whether the staff is really connected to them, whether they really care for them, where other children and where we develop logic and rationale may not have that set of skills to do so. So that's important for our staff to be aware of.
Is it correct to say then that when a child comes into Little House, they basically get an older brother or sister for a one-on-one relationship, and that's in place for them when they come into one of your facilities?
To a point. We always cater to, and that is usually done naturally, to the child who has the most needs. And when you look at that, that's interesting too, because children, they want attention. So when you give attention to a child, and we focus often at those who act out the most, it's really interesting. And we use that in training so often and say, we see ourselves as policing children often. But we need to pay attention to those who do well. Reports are often based on incidents. And we have developed a report about extraordinary achievements. It can be a very little achievement. It can be as small as a child who gets 4 or 5 physical restraints to prevent them from harming others or themselves a week. If that goes down to 4 or 3, that is an accomplishment for that child. We may still say it's too many, but that's an accomplishment, and we try to build on that. Go ahead.
So you celebrate each achievement, no matter how seemingly basic or beginning it might seem to be.
Correct.
Like a reduction in the number of restraints. So that's...
For instance, yes. And then you talked about the one-on-one. If a child requires a one-on-one, then we ask the Children's Aid Society whether they provide extra funding for a one-on-one when it is needed. And then we have a specific plan for the hours that it is needed and what goals need to be achieved and the strategies how to achieve that within our own resources to provide that.
And so that's how you're able to customize your services to the unique needs of youth?
Correct. When a child comes in, an assessment is done. They come with an assessment. We observe the children in the beginning. Not only in the beginning, but in the beginning to get to know them. And when necessary, we have a professional involved. What happens often when we get a referral, the representation of that child's makeup is highlighted with a lot of negatives. Now, we need to know the negatives, for we need to know what the worst conditions can be. I always look for a positive. I go over it, and so does Bernice. Say, give me one sentence. Child likes to please, has an engaging smile, something. That is a strength, and we like to build on that. Then we give it to the parents in the home, for they also need to see the profile of the child. And I tell them, I said, don't tell me whether you want the child or not. Tell me what you see. Give me strengths, give me positives, give me feedback, but not yes or no. That's too simple.
So your starting point is proactive rather than reactive.
You may say that, yes. You may say that. And the interesting thing is then when you have that profile of the child is with us for a month. And often we get feedback and say, wow, that child is different. Well, we say there is a honeymoon period, and that is often the case too. But then you say, hey, that child remains in the behavior well above the average as exhibited before. So the question is, why? And humbly, I often relate to the environment. And I don't say that we are the only ones, but when that happens, there is a reason for it. And then I relate that when you have a flower, and you have a flower sitting in a closet, no sun, no rain, no wind, the flower dies. You take that flower and you put it in the sun before it is really dead. In the sun, you water it, you put it outside, and you see the flower blooming. What often happens, when that flower blooms, when the child makes progress, a child is taken out of the environment, taken out of the residential care, taken out of the foster care, or wherever the child is, and to put it back in the environment where it came from, because the child is doing so well. Well, that's the same as having a flower, putting it back in the closet, and guess what? After a while, flower goes down, right?
It stops, yes.
Yes, yes. Now, that doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes the environment where it came from has changed, and that is very beneficial. But that's the example I often use.
I see. It's a good metaphor. What you put in place, the way you support the specific needs of youth, kind of needs to stay in place as they develop further, and rather than, you said, as being put back in a closet. I mean, that seems to be the wrong message to send a child who's making progress and then taken out of a supportive environment.
Yes, there was Dr. Ross Green, and he developed the model of the collaborative problem-solving approach. And he had a saying. He says, when the demands outstrip the skills, a child is more likely to act out. If you take that concept, so then you say the children and the support, as you just mentioned, that needs to continue, but we got to teach. We got to teach rather than punish. When a child is acting out, when they have difficulty in behaviors, when we say that is an undesired behavior and we want to replace it with desired behaviors, the old teaching model, and I got to be very careful when I say that, but let me continue at that train of thought, is often punishment. You know, it is interesting when I do a training and I role play that almost. I said, one time I was kidnapped. I said, and the kidnappers, they wanted me to fly a Boeing 747, and I told them, I can't. They said, you can't? I said, no. So they beat the heck out of me, and they said, no, fly that thing. I said, sorry, guys, I can't. So they started beating me again. I said, and guess, to the staff, I said, guess what happened? I said, magically, I sat on the cockpit seat, I said, and I flew that Boeing 747 as if I was the best pilot in the world. I said, so after that, what I did, I came back, and I said, I got a solution for all the problems. I said, we're going to punish hard enough. I said, and suddenly you're all getting the skills that you couldn't get or are a hard time to get when you paid thousands of dollars in educational fees. I said, I'm kidding.
Of course.
Doesn't work. I said, but then if I would get training in the skills, I said, and then somebody comes and holds a gun against my head, I hope not, and say, fly that 747, I said I would be able to do it because of the skills, not because of the punishment.
It's an excellent perspective shift, a necessary one. Albert, let me ask you, how did you decide to bring CPI training into Little House?
CPI training, we have done that from the very beginning. I look at CPI at a core foundation, and that is the integrated experience. And to me, it is so important, and I can go as far back as when we were born and even the time we were in the mother womb. I look at behavior, and I look at how we develop. There are a lot of influences that we experience. And it's well known, too, that in the mother womb, a lot of conditions that the mother goes through affect the development of the child, and can really hamper the development, right? So I call that the beginning of the integrated experience, but the integration isn't there yet. It is only one-sided, but the principle of it is the same, how one affects the other one, and then later the other one in the behavior affects the previous person again. So when you look at that, then it tells us that we got to be aware how we interact with the children. We influence the children. But when we get an applicant coming for an interview, talk with them, And one of my questions always is, tell me, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much control you think a child has over their behavior. I said, now, 10 means 100% and 0 means no control. But you cannot say 5. And I look at them and I have that half smile, and they get it. I said, I don't want anybody to sit on the fence. I said, some they say, don't. I said, no, you got to go one way or the other. So I said, there is no right or wrong answer. I said, but the answer is important. So I have had responses from 10 to 0. So when they say 10, that means the child has 100% control over the behavior. I look at them for impact. I said, well, the interview is over. I said, I can take you out for a coffee. I said, and then, we're going to change the world. I said, because this will have a great impact. I said, we don't need counselors anymore. I said, we don't need therapists. We don't need psychologists, maybe not psychiatrists. I said, medication that alters behavior, we may not need that. And by that time, I'm interrupted and say, no, I didn't mean that. I said, I said, so it's not 100%. No, under certain conditions. So when we talk a little bit further, I say, why I asked that question? And I get several answers. I said, my reason for the question is this. For how you believe this to be true affects how you are going to be affected by the behavior of the children. I said, if you think that the children have 100% control over their behavior, I said, you are most likely to believe that when a child acts out, they do it on purpose. Where they have control, so they could have chosen a different kind of behavior. I said, so when you believe they do it on purpose, I said, now you set yourself up for fueling your emotions of anger.
Yes.
I said, when you are angry, I said, then your response to the child is different. I would say it's less a response, but more a reaction. I said, but when you say, on the lower end of the scale, you say from 1 to 3, maybe a 4, I said, now you say, wow, that child doesn't have that control. So you're more likely to stimulate a feeling of compassion. I said, and when you have that compassion, I said, now you affect the child in a positive way. And I jump here to the CPI, where you have the nonverbals, where you have the paraverbals. Yeah, how you say what you say, the tone of your voice, the volume of your voice, the cadence, the smoothness of how you talk to the child, your body language. I said, so you already know control is not there. Now you can influence the child. I said, and that is what they call in the CPI, the integrated experience. The child doesn't do certain things, and the CPI says also we cannot force them to do it. When you take the crisis development model, you have the first, it starts with anxiety. But anxiety is also defined in different ways. It can be withdrawal, it can be drumming of the fingers, it can be several things. But in order to be able to recognize anxiety, you got to know the child. If you don't know the child, you don't know what is habitual or what is due to a change in circumstances that make the child anxious. And then when we get anxious before an exam, we don't need somebody to yell at us. We need somebody to show empathy, compassion. That's the step, the response of the child, of the staff's attitude towards the child. Be supportive. A visit may be canceled. Child acts out. We need to know that a visit is canceled. And we got to respond to the child supportive. Maybe, if I would be in your shoes, I would probably terribly angry, maybe worse than you. So I see the CPI, the teaching model of significant value. I think it is fantastic in all aspects. Then they talk about contributing factors. The contributing factor relates directly again to development, the integrated experience. And when it comes to the contributing factors, I always split it in two. I know the CPI mentioned it once, but I do it in two. I say there are contributing factors. They are from way past. They can be abuse, neglect. I said, and then there are contributing factors they call triggers. I call that dependent factors. For the triggers depend on the first contributing factors, And in combination of that, they can then cause the child to behave in a certain way. So you could have a trigger that someone says to a child, "I love you." And I've heard this from actually a foster parent. He said, I told the child I love them. And later, the child is acting out, really acting out. He said, there are other things, and I'm looking what was the cause. I said, to make a long story short, we discovered that when the child was abused, the parents always told him, I do that because I love you.
Because I love you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah? So you have a trigger, but that is based on an older contributing factor, where love was associated with now the abuse comes. So it can be complicated.
But there is that prior conditioning to set up that trigger.
Correct.
Now, how many staff at that little house have taken nonviolent crisis intervention training?
All of our frontline staff, there is about 20. It varies, staff comes and goes sometimes, but about 20 years.
So everyone gets trained?
Yes, it is a requirement. We train them before they start, and we do a refresher every year. But when I hire a staff today and we have the training set in a few days and then they start, after that, when others do a refresher or they have other new staff coming, I often invite the staff that just got the training to do this second time, because I've done the training for many years and I still am always learning here. So when staff gets it, it may be overwhelming the first time. So when they do the refresher or being part of a second training a little bit later, they often say, hey, it was good. I forgot most of it. I said, don't worry. I said, I forget it too. I use my books up. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, in our pre-interview, Albert, you had a really fascinating statement. You said, when confronted with challenging behavior, you have the thought, every child is perfect. Could you explain that for me?
Yeah, I can. I've said that at trainings too, and believe me, the staff looks at me and say, I hear them thinking, and I tell them that too. You probably think I have lost my mind, I got to resign, and you need somebody else to run this organization. I said, for you will tell me and say, this child is not perfect. And then I look at it, and there are two models of perfection. One is the perfection that we all may describe in a certain way for a particular event or object. And I get as many models of perfection as I ask people to describe it.
Yes.
Then there is perfection, and I define that, in my opinion, as something appears because it cannot appear in any different way. So if something can be different than it is, I say it must be perfect, not meaning that it is a desirable perfection, but it can be different unless something else different. And I use this example to staff often.
So this is to stress the individuality of every child.
Yes. And maybe this example describes it better, and then I go into the child itself. When somebody wants to make a carrot cake, so they put the ingredients in the cake, they put it in the oven, they take it out, look at the cake, and I hear something like, darn it, that cake is horrible. It's not perfect. I baked the worst cake. And I say, can I see it? They say, yeah. And I look at it. I say, can I taste it? Yeah. I said, it's a perfect cake. They said, how can it be a perfect cake? It's not a carrot cake. I said, no, it isn't. I said, it's a raisin cake. But it's not perfect. I said, of course. You put raisins in there. It is a perfect raisin cake. It may not be preferable, but it's perfect.
There you go.
Yeah. So when you look at the children, if you have an autistic child, the child behaves autistic. If you get a defiant child, the child behaves defiant. Now, not all the time, but those are the trends. So in that case, the child is perfect. And when staff can grasp that idea, I said, now, if you go for the principle, the child is perfect, that means giving the conditions, the child could not be different than the child is. If we want the child to be different, we got to change it. We got to change something like 2 plus 2 cannot be 4 and also 5. We got to change the equation. So here the integrated experience comes in. We can force the child, I said, now we got to teach skills. We got to see how we approach the child, how we interact with the child, and how we can influence the child so that that is processed in the brain and we may accomplish a different outcome.
Mm-hmm. And that leads to my next question about why outcomes are so important at Little House and your concept of an outcome statement and how goals are related to that. Could you talk about that?
Yes. When the needs of the child are defined and assessed, then we look at that and often look at the child as life skills and social skills. What are the potentials of the child that they can accomplish? And most basic one is to enable the child to live independently with a degree of happiness in different aspects. Yeah. So then we set goals and say we like the child to achieve that goal. For instance, to be independently able to read the train schedule, the bus schedule, to get on the train or the bus and travel from A to B. So then we develop a strategy and say, how can we accomplish that? So we can have the child to figure it out themselves, see what they lack, and then teach them the skills how to accomplish it. So then when we have a goal, now we got to define the characteristics of success. And one of the things depends how do we define the goal. Depending on how we describe the goal, that makes it sometimes difficult or easier to define success. When we say the child got to travel independent, the ultimate sign of success is that the child goes on the train. We travel with the child. We don't interfere, and she is able or he is able to go from A to B without problems. Mm-hmm. That's a success. That's an example. So there are many different facets, but that is important. Successes can be measured in that way. But then there are successes, they are hard to measure. We get questions sometimes from the social workers and say, the child is completely different. How did you do that? If you can duplicate it, you can create a success for other ones. And sometimes it's just the environment. Again, I hate to beat this horse to death, but the integrated experience, CPI, we affect the child, and the outcome is positive.
And that relates to another concept, Albert, that you talked about in our pre-interview, involving what you described as a child's mental blackboard, and that counselors, when they interact with a child, write on that child's mental blackboard. Why is that so important?
Well, the children, they perceive their environment. They perceive us. Sometimes they perceive us in a different way than we intended to. And sometimes we are not even aware of what we intend. We just react with our own emotions. So we say in the trainings to the staff and say, in all your interactions with the children, verbal, nonverbal, in any way, shape, or form, we got to be aware that we should write on the mental blackboard of the child the following message. You are significant. You are important. You are worthwhile. You are cared for. You are loved. And that is of the utmost importance, for those are factors that the child doubts all the time. They do self-talk. When something goes wrong, they say, it's my fault. I'm no good. I will never accumulate to anything positive. I said, so it's not the words, the message. And I used the following example. I said, when I'm doing the dishes, I said, and a child asks and say, can I talk to you? And I say, don't you see I'm doing the dishes? I said, no. What message do I send? Forget the words. What message do I send? I said, the child could think, does he think I'm blind? I'm not important. The dishes are more important. He really doesn't care about me at all. I said, but if I respond and say, hey, Johnny, I'm doing the dishes, but you have an important question, I'm sure, or you want to talk about something important. Can I finish the dishes, or you need me right now? If you allow me to do it, I said, maybe you want to help me, but otherwise I will get back to you as soon as I'm done. And if not, please remind me. So it's up to you. Tell me what you want me to do. I said, the tone, the engagement. I said, sometimes that's more than enough for them, for they feel validated, they feel accepted, they feel worthwhile, they feel important. That makes the world of difference.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're basically rescripting a child's self-image through positive behavior support then.
Yes, yes. We hope to accomplish that, yes. And we believe firmly that that is a way.
You've said that you believe that the CPI teaching model, outside of its physical techniques, reaches much further into the essence of behavior, its contributing factors, and is most effective when applied with understanding and compassion. Could you talk, Albert, about how CPI training reaches into the essence of behavior and contributing factors?
Yeah. There are many models. They deal with instant situations or crises. And that's often how staff looks at it. Say, there's a crisis, give me a quick fix. The CPI, and again, the integrated experiences and the contributing factors, and the way it makes us aware of ourselves, I believe that touches a child deep, not only when there is a crisis, but I think many facets of CPI can be applied routinely without even being aware of it. But if we understand the child, when we understand the essence of the CPI model, we should always apply that. Not saying, okay, let me see whether the child is anxious. Now I got to do supportive. Oh, child is defensive. Oh, yeah, I got that kite thing. No, it has the emphasis and all the materials to absorb in us and to make it part of our continuous interaction with the child. That's where I say that it reaches far beyond. It touches the child where we make connections. I use an example for that. I often use examples to the staff. I say the making of connections, making of the relationships is important. And one time I took a shaver to the staff training, and I showed them, I plugged it in. I said to the staff, I said, connection there? Yep. I said, how do you know? Well, you plugged it in. I said, now watch. And then I pushed a little bit harder, and the light came on the shaver. I said, what happened? I said, I made a connection. I said, this is the difference between children come in and you say, hey, how are you doing? Can you go downstairs and hang up your coat? I said, or, how are you doing? Okay. And then you pick out one child and say, hey, Peter, come down here. Got to talk with you for a moment. What's happening? Nothing. I say, oh, let's do this over again. I said, I see it on your eyes. I see it in your hair. I smell it. I said, there is something wrong. I know you. He said, yeah, I was bullied at school. That's the relationship. And that I see as the teaching that is encompassed in the whole CPI that we can continuously apply to the children and touching them deep inside for years to come. Right after, I just got, this is interesting, just got an email yesterday from a child with severe difficulties. And he stayed with us for several years, and then he left. And, this is the biggest reward for us. He said, if it wasn't for Little House, I don't know where I would have been. And to me, that means so much. And it's not to say, hey, let me see and show how proud we can be and how good work we do. No, I mean it in a way that we reach the children. Most of them, we don't know. And to staff, I say, if you come and you want to see everybody to become a lawyer, to become a doctor, and to be successful and happy ever after, I said, you probably will not always see that. I said, but if you can make a difference today in their life, that they are not fearful, that they feel safe, cared for. I said, maybe this afternoon. I said, maybe this morning. I said, and maybe this moment. I said, we weave it together and we affect them for a lifetime.
So you're saying a routine and continuous application of the CPI model basically scripts a child or behaviorally conditions a child towards a positive outlook and a positive self-image.
Yes, if we take it out of using it only when there is a crisis. And I think CPI has that in it to be able to apply it routinely.
I see. That's an excellent observation. Albert, you have this book that you've written, and I would really like to have you tell us about your concept here about behavior. Why is behavior not simply a matter of choice, rather? Could you talk to us about that?
Yes, I will talk a little bit about it, but I won't give the conclusion away. Yeah.
Okay, right. No spoiler.
So, no spoiler today. I think this book, it's not a collection of thoughts expressed in a different way, but I believe it is a book of a concept never expressed before in this manner. And I try to say that in a humble way. I approach behavior different than a conventional way. And if we look at society, when you go to court and there is a court case, the prosecution is eager to establish motive. When some of our friends do something out of the ordinary, our first question is, why did you do that? We often say when we have done something, if I would have known that, I would not have done that. This all suggests that it wasn't just simple a matter of choice, but it was heavily influenced by factors. And the fact that I say, if I would have known that, I would not have done it. Or my friend calls me up today and says, I'm in Moscow. I'm sure within the first sentences, the question comes, why?
Yes.
What are you doing there? And he says, oh, well, I just got up and I decided to go. I definitely wouldn't say, yeah, that's how you choose. I would say, what happened? What's wrong? Yeah. So I have taken that concept further. I have thought about it for a long time. I talked about it to my closest friends and my family. And then at one time I said, inspired by some of my friends and a professional, he said, why don't you try to put your thoughts in a book? So I started. And this is the interesting fact. And when I was writing it, the thought developed, it processed. It was almost like stepping stones. And I asked myself the same questions over and over and over again, which I believe that put my brain on an automotive search. I could be driving, or I do a lot of jogging in something, and sometimes an idea would pop up in my mind. I say, yeah, I got to remember that. And I write it down. And I blend it all together. And this is the interesting point. When I reached my conclusion, I was surprised myself about the conclusion. At the onset of writing, I never anticipated, not even considered it possible, that the conclusion would be as I have expressed it in my book today. So for me, it was a great experience. I enjoyed it very much, and I learned from it. That sounds kind of contradictory, right? When you write something yourself, you learn from it. But the process was fascinating. And I believe that for those who are interested in it and read it, it gets complex sometimes. It goes deep, but it is a different way of looking at it. Whether people agree with it or not, that's up to them. But it is a different way of looking at it, yes.
Well, we'll be interested to know what your surprise conclusion is, and I would ask you, Albert, when you publish, will you let us know and maybe give us an excerpt so we can publish a little bit of your book and get people interested?
It is my honor to do that, definitely.
Excellent. Well, it has been our honor to speak with you today, and I thank you very much for the interview. Are there any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our audience?
I think in general that understanding of children's behavior is so important, and it is not always what we see is what it is. There are underlying factors. They are sometimes so deep, and the pain is so deep that it is exhibited in behavior. When we judge the behavior, we may not always be right, but when we have compassion, understanding, and we can teach, we can say one encouraging word, one smile, we may touch that person for a lifetime.
That's a beautiful final thought. Thank you, Albert. My guest today has been Albert Krall, who in 1999 founded the Little House Residential Care Services, which is a treatment center for kids who are developmentally challenged, emotionally disturbed, or living with autism. My thanks to you, Albert.
It was my pleasure and honor.
And thank to all of you for listening. Thank you for joining us today on Unrestrained. Tune in again soon for another interview with an expert in behavior management. Until then, this is your host, Terry Vittone, hoping your intention is prevention.